There's a specific kind of tired that doesn't come from working too hard or sleeping too little. It's a tiredness that follows you into the weekend, sits with you during lunch, and somehow makes you feel more drained after resting than before. And if you've been trying to figure out where it comes from, you're probably not looking in the right place. Most people assume they're just busy, or stressed, or going through something. But there's a quieter explanation underneath all of that. One that doesn't announce itself. One that most people never quite name. You open your phone first thing in the morning, not because you need something specific, not because you're waiting for an important message. You open it because that's what your hands do now. Before the day has even started, before you've had water, before your eyes have fully adjusted to the light, you're already consuming, you're already reacting, you're already inside the machine. And the strange thing is, it doesn't feel like a problem while it's happening. That's the part nobody warns you about. Social media was never designed to feel like something you need to escape from. It was designed to feel exactly like something you chose, something optional, something easy to put down. Except most people aren't putting it down. Most people are reaching for it in elevators, at traffic lights, in the middle of conversations, in the bathroom, in bed at 2 in the morning when they can't quite explain why they're still awake. The average person now spends somewhere between 4 and 7 hours per day interacting with screens. A significant portion of that is social media, which means that for many people, the largest single activity in their daily life, outside of sleep and maybe work, is scrolling through content created by strangers. That's not a small thing. That sounds small. It isn't, because what happens during those hours isn't passive. Your brain isn't resting while you scroll. It's working. It's evaluating, comparing, responding emotionally, releasing chemicals, forming associations, building habits, and slowly, quietly, reorganizing itself around the patterns it keeps experiencing. Neuroscientists have a phrase for this: neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reshape itself based on repeated experience. It used to be something people discussed in the context of learning languages or recovering from injury. Now it applies to something much more ordinary. Every time you open an app and feel that small pull of anticipation, your brain is taking note. Every time a notification arrives and you feel a flicker of something, your brain is adjusting. Every time a piece of content makes you feel briefly better and then immediately hollow, your brain is learning. And after months of this, after years of this, the architecture of how you think, how you feel, how you focus, and how you experience boredom starts to quietly shift. Not dramatically. Not in a way that shows up on a scan or announces itself during a conversation, but subtly, in the way it becomes harder to sit with silence, in the way a 10-minute task starts to feel unbearably long, in the way you reach for your phone not because you're bored exactly, but because the absence of stimulation has started to feel almost uncomfortable. That discomfort is new, or at least, it's newer than most people realize. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called the variable reward schedule. It was first studied in the context of slot machines. The idea is straightforward but unsettling once you see it clearly. When rewards are unpredictable, when you don't know if the next pull of the lever will give you something or nothing, the compulsion to keep pulling becomes significantly stronger than if the reward were consistent and guaranteed. Social media runs on exactly this principle, not by accident, by design. You open Instagram and sometimes there are 15 new things that feel interesting. Sometimes there are 2. Sometimes someone has commented on something you posted and it gives you a small warm feeling. Sometimes nobody has and you feel a version of something you probably wouldn't call disappointment out loud, but that quietly sits there anyway. The unpredictability isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system. It's what keeps people returning compulsively rather than intentionally. And this is where modern life becomes genuinely strange. Because the same mechanism that makes gambling psychologically addictive, the same neurological loop that casinos have spent decades refining and optimizing, is now embedded inside an app that most people check before they've had breakfast. An app that children use. An app that people open during funerals, during therapy sessions, during conversations with people they love. The dopamine system in the human brain was not built for this. It evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to help humans navigate a world where rewards were scarce, where finding food or safety or connection was genuinely uncertain. The anticipation of a reward, that specific electrical feeling of maybe, was supposed to motivate behavior in an environment where effort and patience were required. Now that same system is being triggered dozens, sometimes hundreds of times per day. by notifications, by likes, by comments, by the simple act of refreshing a feed and seeing something new appear. And what happens to any system that gets overstimulated consistently over a long period of time is that it recalibrates. It raises its own threshold. It requires more stimulation to feel the same response, which means that over time, ordinary life starts to feel quieter than it used to, less immediate, less rewarding, not because ordinary life has changed, but because your baseline for stimulation has shifted. This is why a Sunday afternoon can feel strangely heavy sometimes, why sitting with a book feels harder than it did 5 years ago, why a conversation without your phone nearby can start to feel slightly restless even when you're talking to someone you genuinely care about. It's not that you've become lazy or distracted or less interested in real life. It's that the neurological environment your brain is operating inside has been quietly modified. And the modification happened so gradually, so pleasantly, so disguised as entertainment and connection and information, that most people never noticed the moment it started shaping them more than they were shaping it. If these kinds of quieter conversations help you slow down and think a little differently about the things affecting modern life, you're welcome to stay around. There's more here worth sitting with. Because the attention economy isn't just competing for your time, it's competing for the quality of your inner experience, for your capacity to feel present, for your ability to tolerate the ordinary beautiful slowness of being alive without reaching for something to fill it. And most people are losing that competition without realizing a competition was happening at all. There's something that happens to identity inside social media that almost nobody talks about honestly. Not in the way it actually feels. Not in the quiet, slightly embarrassing way it actually operates inside a person's daily life. You post something, a photo, a thought, an observation, and then you wait. Not consciously maybe, you put the phone down and do something else. But part of your attention never fully leaves. Part of you is quietly monitoring, checking, wondering how it landed. And when you pick the phone back up and see the response, or the absence of response, something happens internally that feels disproportionate to what it logically should be. A stranger's approval starts to carry emotional weight it was never supposed to carry. This is one of the stranger psychological consequences of living inside these platforms long enough. The external validation loop becomes so frequent, so embedded in daily experience, that the brain begins to treat it as meaningful social information, which in some evolutionary sense it is. Humans are deeply social creatures. Belonging and approval and recognition matter neurologically, not just emotionally. They're connected to survival mechanisms that run very deep. But the social environment human brains evolved inside was small, intimate, a community of maybe 150 people at most. Your reputation within that group mattered because those were the people you depended on. Their opinion of you had direct consequences for your actual life. Now that same neurological system is processing feedback from thousands of people, some of whom you've never met, some of whom are responding to a version of you that was carefully constructed and filtered before being shared. And the feedback arrives constantly, asynchronously, unpredictably, from people who know almost nothing about your actual life. And yet the brain responds as if it matters, as if it's real social data, as if the number next to a small heart icon has something meaningful to say about your place in the world. Maybe that's part of the problem. Not the technology itself exactly, but the mismatch. The gap between what the brain thinks is happening socially and what is actually happening. The confusion between digital performance and genuine human connection. Because after long enough inside these systems, people start optimizing themselves for the platform without noticing they're doing it. The photos get slightly more considered. The opinions get slightly more calibrated to what generates response. The version of yourself that exists online starts to drift, slowly, from the version that wakes up at 3 in the morning with a dry mouth and real anxieties and a complicated relationship with their own reflection. And at some point the gap between those two versions of yourself starts to create a kind of internal friction that's very hard to name. A low-level dissatisfaction. A sense that something is slightly off but you can't locate exactly what. A feeling of performing your own life rather than living it. Psychologists sometimes call this self-concept fragmentation. The sense that your identity has become distributed across too many surfaces, too many audiences, too many competing versions of who you're supposed to be. And it's exhausting in a way that's genuinely difficult to explain to someone who hasn't felt it, because it doesn't feel like exhaustion from doing too much. It feels like exhaustion from being too many things to too many people while simultaneously never feeling fully seen by any of them. The comparison dimension of this adds another layer entirely, because social media doesn't just show you other people's lives. It shows you the curated highlights of other people's lives, presented in a continuous uninterrupted stream, with no natural context about the ordinary difficulty happening just outside the frame. You see the vacation, not the credit card statement that followed. You see the promotion announcement, not the 3 years of quiet anxiety that preceded it. You see the relationship photo, not the conversation that happened an hour before it was taken. And your brain, which is very good at drawing social comparisons, but not particularly good at accounting for selection bias in the data it's comparing against, starts to feel like everyone else is slightly further ahead, slightly more together, slightly more at ease with being alive, which is a feeling that stays with people, quietly, in the background, like a low hum you stop noticing consciously, but that never actually turns off. The strange thing about all of this is that most people already sense it, not in a clinical way, not with vocabulary or frameworks or neuroscience terminology, but in small, honest moments that arrive when nobody is watching. The moment you close an app and immediately reopen it without knowing why. The moment you spend 40 minutes scrolling and put the phone down feeling somehow worse than before you picked it up, but couldn't explain exactly what happened during those 40 minutes or what you were even looking for. The moment you're sitting somewhere genuinely beautiful, genuinely quiet, genuinely worth being present inside, and you feel the pull anyway. That specific gravitational tug toward the screen, toward the feed, toward the endless availability of something slightly more stimulating than the present moment. People notice these things. They just don't always have a way to think about them that feels honest rather than dramatic. Because saying social media is affecting my brain sounds like an overstatement. It sounds like something a concerned parent says, or a documentary from 5 years ago, or a take that belongs on a bumper sticker. It doesn't quite capture the quiet, ordinary, deeply personal way it actually operates inside a life. It's not dramatic, it accumulates, it compounds, it changes things so slowly and so pleasantly that the change only becomes visible in retrospect. When you compare who you were before the habits formed to who you are now, trying to sit quietly with your own thoughts for more than 6 minutes without reaching for something. And this is the part that deserves more honesty than it usually gets. The technology isn't neutral. The platforms aren't passive tools that simply respond to human behavior. They are active environments, deliberately engineered by some of the most sophisticated behavioral psychologists and attention researchers in the world, optimized continuously using real-time data about what keeps human beings engaged the longest, at the deepest level of compulsion, with the smallest amount of conscious resistance. You are not fighting your own weakness when you find it hard to put the phone down. You are navigating an environment that has been specifically and expensively designed to make putting the phone down feel like the harder choice. That's not an excuse, but it is context. And context changes how you relate to something. Because when people believe the problem is personal failure, the response is shame, and shame tends to make people reach for comfort. And the most available comfort in a modern apartment at 11 at night is usually the same phone they were just trying to put down. But when people understand that what they're experiencing is a predictable human response to a deliberately engineered environment, something shifts, not dramatically, not immediately, but quietly. The way perspective shifts when you realize the exhaustion you've been carrying isn't evidence of your inadequacy, but evidence of the pressure you've been navigating without much acknowledgement. Awareness doesn't fix everything. It would be dishonest to suggest it does. The platforms are still there. The variable rewards are still firing. The dopamine loops are still running. The comparison engine doesn't pause because you've learned its name. But there's something that happens when you stop experiencing your own distraction as a character flaw and start seeing it as a reasonable response to an unreasonable amount of engineered stimulation. You start making slightly different choices, not perfect choices, not dramatic ones, but quieter ones, leaving the phone in another room sometimes, letting a notification wait, choosing boredom occasionally, not as punishment, but as a small act of reclaiming what ordinary stillness used to feel like before it started feeling like something to escape from. The brain that has been slowly rewired by years of compulsive digital stimulation doesn't return to its previous state overnight. Neuroplasticity works in both directions, but it works slowly. It requires repetition. It requires patience with the discomfort of wanting stimulation and choosing not to reach for it immediately. of sitting with the quiet long enough that the quiet starts to feel inhabitable again rather than threatening. And maybe that's what this conversation is really about. Not the technology exactly, not a particular app or platform or algorithm, though all of those things matter, but something underneath them. Something about what it means to be a human nervous system living inside a world that has been redesigned very recently and very aggressively around capturing and holding your attention as a commercial resource. You are not just a user of these platforms. You are the product being optimized. Your attention is the inventory being sold. Your emotional responses are the data being harvested and fed back into systems designed to make those emotional responses more predictable, more consistent, more profitable. Most people know this abstractly, but knowing something abstractly and feeling it clearly enough to change something, those are two different experiences separated by a significant amount of honest reflection. So maybe the first step isn't a digital detox or a screen time limit or deleting an app in a moment of frustration only to reinstall it for days later. Maybe the first step is just sitting with the reality of it for a moment, letting it land. Letting it feel as significant as it actually is rather than as ordinary as it has been made to feel through sheer repetition and ubiquity. Your attention is not infinite. Your capacity for presence is not renewable on demand. The version of you that can sit with silence, that can think slowly, that can feel things without immediately reaching for a way to share or document or react to them, that version of you is worth protecting, not with urgency, not with self-criticism, just with a little more awareness than yesterday. Maybe that's enough to start with.